Good morning, everyone. My name is George Buscemi, President of Campagne Québec Vie and Vice President of Campaign Life Coalition, Canada. I'm replacing today Pete Baklinski, Communications Director for Campaign Life Coalition, who could not make it today because of the weather. This Saturday, January 28, marks 35 years today when the Supreme Court of Canada sided with arch-abortionist Henry Morgentaler and struck down our country's law governing abortion, brought in by Pierre-Elliott Trudeau in 1969. Prior to 1969, abortion was illegal, and humans living in their mother's womb were protected. The new 1969 abortion provisions in Section 251 of the Criminal Code allowed a woman to have an abortion under certain conditions, including that the abortion be approved by a therapeutic abortion committee and that the abortion happen in an approved hospital, quote unquote. Morgenthaler broke this law by setting up his own illegal abortion mill in Toronto in the early 80s, where he killed hundreds of preborn children by abortion. He was charged, and his case eventually wound its way to the Supreme Court in 1988. Alors aujourd'hui, ça va faire 35 ans depuis que la loi a été abolie sur l'avortement. En 1969, Pierre-Elliott Trudeau a mis en place un régime abortif qui permettait l'avortement avec la permission d'un comité thérapeutique soi-disant. Et en 1988, Henry Morgentaler, l'avorteur en chef du Canada, a fait renverser cette loi qui limitait tant soit peu l'avortement. Et aujourd'hui, l'avortement est légal, soi-disant, de la conception jusqu'à la naissance au Canada, sans raison aucune pour un avortement. There are three main takeaways from the Morgenthaler decision of the Supreme Court of 1988. The first is that the Supreme Court did not find a right to abortion. The second is that the court did not settle the abortion question. The third is that the court invited Parliament to pass a new law balancing the rights of the mother with the state's interest in protecting the life of the fetus. Alors, il y a trois points pertinents qu'on doit se souvenir en ce qui a trait à la décision Morgenthaler de 1988. Premier point, c'est que la Cour suprême n'a pas conféré un soi-disant droit à l'avortement. Deuxième point, la question de l'avortement n'a pas été réglée au Canada. Et le troisième point, c'est que la Cour a invité le Parlement à légiférer en matière d'avortement. I will now invite Jack Fonseca, CLC's Director of Political Operations, who will speak more about what the Supreme Court justices wanted when it comes to legal protection for life in the womb. J'invite maintenant Jack Fonseca, le directeur des opérations politiques pour Campaign Life Coalition, de nous en dire plus sur ce que la Cour suprême voulait par rapport à l'avortement et à la justice pour l'enfant à naître. Jack Fonseca.
Thank you, George. In 2 days' time, on the 35th anniversary of the Morgenthaler decision, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will be tempted to proclaim, as he has done many times before, that abortion is a, quote, right protected by the Charter, affirmed by the Supreme Court of Canada, and that would be unconstitutional to restrict at any point before birth. Politicians of all party stripes often repeat this claim, which holds that women have a legitimate so-called right to kill their offspring in utero, and that any legislation whatsoever attempting to restore legal protection to the unborn would, of course, be struck down by the Supreme Court as an affront to the Constitution. Problem is, that claim is not supported by facts. It's more like a gossip, supported only by the empty air which blows it from person to person, infecting the hearer with its malice until, having gone round the nation and entered every ear, it spreads up to the mind where it gets lodged and perceived as truth by many. With all due respect to our Prime Minister, he has been misled about what the 7 presiding justices wrote in the 1988 Supreme Court decision. If you read the actual Morgenthaler ruling, what you discover is that they never found a right to abortion. Rather, there was unanimous agreement amongst the 7 judges that the state has a legitimate interest in protecting unborn human life. To quote Chief Justice Robert George Dixon from the 5-2 majority that struck down the previous abortion law, quote, "I agree that the protection of fetal interest by Parliament is also a valid governmental objective," end quote. Justice Lamer concurred. And here's from Madam Justice Bertha Wilson, also from the majority opinion, quote, "The precise point in the development of the fetus at which the state's interest in its protection becomes compelling, I leave to the informed judgment of the legislature," end quote. You got that? She admitted that the state has an interest in protecting the fetus. And she invited the legislature to determine at which point legal protection ought to begin. So today, we appeal to our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, please listen to Bertha. To paraphrase her words, Mr. Trudeau, protection of life in the womb is something which the state of which you are the head has a compelling interest. It's notable that Bertha Wilson was the most pro-abortion of the 7 judges as well, and still she conceded this truth. In fairness, it needs to be acknowledged that Bertha Wilson also opined that abortion should be permitted in the first trimester and restrictions should apply somewhere in the second. But technology has developed to the point where it is now settled science that a child becomes a human being at the moment of conception. Therefore, the arbitrary age line that Bertha drew is not morally supportable. Human rights begins when a human being begins, and that's at conception. Now here's from a 3rd judge in that majority ruling, Justice Jean Beats, quote, "I am of the view that the protection of the fetus is a valid objective in Canadian criminal law," end quote. Justice Beats went on to say, quote, "I think Section 1 of the Charter authorizes reasonable limits to be put on a woman's right having regard to the state interest in the protection of the fetus," end quote. Justice Willard Estee concurred. That is all 5 judges writing the majority opinion, agreeing unambiguously that the state has a legitimate interest in protecting preborn children. Amazing, isn't it? Why don't we hear this kind of talk from Prime Minister Trudeau, who points to the same Supreme Court ruling as his guiding light? Even Henry Morgentaler disagreed with Justin Trudeau's position of abortion on demand throughout all 9 months of pregnancy up to the moment of birth. Morgenthaler once said that, quote, "Around 24 weeks, I have ethical problems doing that," end quote, meaning abortion, of course. And yet, Justin Trudeau made it clear to a reporter some years ago that he would not tolerate a restriction even so mild as banning sex-selective abortions. In conclusion, the Morgenthaler ruling, which some legislators will soon celebrate, actually beckons them to restore legal protection to the unborn child. Thank you. Back to you, George.
Thank you, Jack. I'm now going to invite Josie Lutke, CLC's Director of Education and Advocacy, who will speak about what the Supreme Court and Parliament can do to remedy the current injustice suffered by preborn children targeted for abortion. Je vais maintenant inviter Josie Lutke, la directrice de l'éducation de Campaign Life Coalition, pour parler de comment le Parlement peut remédier à l'injustice soufferte par les enfants à naître.
By failing to extend human rights to all human beings, our legislators and justices have failed in the gravest and most spectacular way possible. the same section of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms that was used in the Morgenthaler decision to strike down the 1969 law, Section 7, should be properly interpreted to preclude abortion. Section 7 reads, "Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person." As was argued in 1988 in the Borowski case, everyone should be understood to include the preborn, as science and logic tell us with certainty that they're human too. Typically, when you say everyone, you mean everyone, all human beings. There's a reason why Article 6 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. The UN, now complicit in abortion, at least knew then that terrible human rights injustices resulted from failing to consider every human being a person deserving of legal protection. We can neither selectively apply human rights to some human beings, nor misorder these rights. The right to life comes first. Without it, no other rights can possibly exist. The right to security of person, to liberty, are rendered moot, meaningless. The right to life is inherent and foundational. There is no my body, no my choice without life. The Supreme Court of Canada has had opportunities to advance the right to life of every human being, both in the Borowski case and recently in 2021. Unfortunately, they declined to hear Mary Wagner's case concerning the humanity of the preborn. So we call on the Supreme Court of Canada to offer justice for the preborn at the earliest possible opportunity. Parliament, too, must move to end abortion completely by recognizing that personhood begins at fertilization. That's when a new human organism comes into existence. Let's not make old mistakes by pretending that there's such thing as humans who aren't persons. We demand legal protection for every zygote, embryo, and fetus, without compromise and without exception. To draw the line anywhere else, be it because of age or development or ability, would be arbitrary. And the arbitrary denial of human rights to human beings is a recipe for disaster, as we're seeing today. Thankfully, it's never too late to right a wrong, as we saw south of the border with the overturning of Roe v. Wade just last year. Lives are on the line. We cannot wait. Thank you.
Thank you, Josie. Merci, Josie. Je vais maintenant inviter le président national de Campaign Life Coalition, M. Jeff Gunnarson, qui a écrit une lettre au premier ministre Trudeau. Il va lire sa lettre pour la première fois aujourd'hui. I'm now going to invite CLC National President Jeff Gunnarson, who has penned a letter to Prime Minister Trudeau. He will now read his letter publicly for the first time.
Dear Prime Minister, Saturday, January the 28th marks 35 years since the Supreme Court of Canada handed down a decision that has impacted and continues to impact the lives of millions of Canadians. In the 1988 R.V. Morgenthaler decision, our country's top court threw out the previous 1969 abortion law put in place by your father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, deeming it unconstitutional, quote unquote. The majority opinion was that the procedural requirements for an abortion violated a woman's charter right to, quote, security of the person, end quote, though 2 of the 7 justices dissented. The court established no right to abortion, a point acknowledged not only by legal professionals, but mainstream media. Last year, the CBC ran a report about the Morgenthaler decision titled, "Why Canada's Roe v. Wade Didn't Enshrine Abortion as a Right." The ruling, which was rife with faults, effectively removed every obstacle, barring pregnant mothers from obtaining an abortion. This allowed mothers to kill their preborn children at any stage during the pregnancy for any reason at all. And sadly, millions of Canadian mothers have chosen to destroy the new human lives growing and developing inside of them. Pause for a moment to consider that over 3 million precious children, boys and girls, have been eliminated by abortion since this decision. The destruction of every one of these children is a tragic loss for their families, their communities, the whole country. Each one was beautifully and wonderfully made by God. Each came into existence to love and needing to be loved. Each had unique talents and gifts to share with others. Each had the power to dream, to create, to change the world. As a full member of the human family, each had an inalienable dignity, and each was endowed with human rights, including the right to life. Abortion violence cut their lives short, stripping them of all they had to offer, all they had to contribute. It stripped them of their futures, their opportunities, their dreams. They were never given the chance to go to school, to become a scientist, doctor, or musician, to help build up this country, making it a better place to live. The Supreme Court justices did not want the Canada we live in today when it comes to abortion. In fact, the court was unanimous in finding that the state has an interest in protecting the lives of humans in the womb. Chief Justice Dixon, with Justice Lamer concurring, wrote, "Like Beats and Wilson, J.J., I agree that protection of fetal interest by Parliament is also a valid governmental objective." Justice Beats, with Justice Esty concurring, wrote that the primary objective of the Criminal Code Section 251, which was repealed, was the protection of the fetus. The primary objective does relate to concerns which are pressing and substantial in a free and democratic society and which, pursuant to Section 1 of the Charter, justify reasonable limits to be put on a woman's right to security of the person, they wrote. Beats continued, I am of the view that the protection of the fetus is, and as the Court of Appeal observed, always has been a valid objective in Canadian criminal law. I think Section 1 of the Charter authorizes reasonable limits to be put on a woman's right having regard to the state interest in the protection of the fetus. Issuing a dissenting opinion, Justice McIntyre and LaForest wrote, quote, historically, there has always been a clear recognition of a public interest in the protection of the unborn, end quote. The majority opinion concluded that the solution to the abortion question, namely how to balance the rights of the mother with the state's interest in protecting life in the womb, must be left to Parliament, since Parliament, the court stated, is elected for that purpose in a free democracy. Prime Minister, Parliament has yet to honor the Supreme Court's invitation that it pass legislation protecting life in the womb, though some flawed attempts have been made. Science has refutably proven that human life begins at fertilization. Medical technology has opened a window to the womb, showing beyond a shadow of a doubt that the new life in the womb is a human life with a body different from the mother's body. A tiny person with unique DNA and fingerprints, a someone whom all of us have a responsibility to care for. Prime Minister, I call upon you and Parliament to follow the invitation of the Supreme Court and pass legislation protecting children in the womb. Such legislation must reflect what science and medical advancements reveal to us about life in the womb, namely that It is a fully human life. Such legislation, if it is to truly remedy the current wrongs suffered by preborn humans, must restore their legal protection from the first moment of existence. It has been said that a nation will be judged by how it treats its most vulnerable members. Prime Minister, I present to you the preborn human child, the most vulnerable among us. These smallest members of the human family are waiting on you and on Parliament to act on their behalf. I ask you, please, stand up for them. God bless you, and God bless Canada.
Thank you, Jeff. Merci, Jeff. Je vais maintenant faire quelques mots en français pour résumer les propos de mes collègues. Mes collègues aujourd'hui ont tous très bien documenté les incohérences et trahisons de nos élites politiques et judiciaires concernant l'avortement, et spécialement le funeste arrêt Morgenthaler, dont nous soulignons le triste 35e anniversaire aujourd'hui. Premièrement, parlons des incohérences. Diverses personnalités publiques, dont notre premier ministre en tête, ne se lassent pas de répéter à tout moment que l'avortement est un soi-disant droit fondamental. Mon collègue Jack Fonseca a observé avec justesse que même la Cour suprême du Canada, lorsqu'elle a rendu sa décision fatidique en 88, a déclaré que l'État avait le droit de défendre la vie humaine avant la naissance. Qui plus est, la juge Bertha Wilson déclara que, sur la question de savoir à quel moment l'enfant naître devrait être protégé, elle laissait le soin de le fixer au jugement éclairé du législateur. C'est donc l'avis même de la Cour suprême du Canada que le Parlement a un droit légitime de légiférer en matière d'avortement. Ma collègue Josie, pour sa part, a signalé l'incohérence crasse des Nations unies qui, d'un côté, font la promotion éhontée de l'avortement partout dans le monde, mais de l'autre, proclament solennellement, dans sa Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme, « Chacun a le droit à la reconnaissance en tout lieu de sa personnalité juridique. » Eh bien, pourquoi refuse-t-on de reconnaître la personnalité juridique de l'enfant qui grandit dans le lieu communément appelé utérus? Pourquoi ce déni de droit lorsqu'on est domicilié dans le ventre de notre mère? Finalement, mon collègue Jeff Gunnarson, président de la Coalition nationale pour la vie, a souligné avec force les trahisons de nos dirigeants. Il y a 35 ans de cela, ici même, à la Cour suprême, ils ont été invités à légiférer, nos dirigeants, en matière d'avortement, et ils n'ont pas pris leurs responsabilités. Après une première tentative infructueuse du gouvernement Mulroney, ils ont tergiversé, ils ont procrastiné. 35 ans plus tard, ce sont 3,5 millions d'enfants qui ont été charcutés dans le ventre de leur mère. 3,5 millions d'âmes créées à l'image et à la ressemblance de Dieu qui avaient la vocation d'aimer et d'être aimés. Il est carrément impossible pour une intelligence humaine de concevoir, encore moins de calculer, la perte que constitue pour l'humanité 3,5 millions d'enfants tués d'une manière aussi inhumaine. Nous en appelons donc au Premier ministre du Canada, Justin Trudeau, pour qu'il accomplisse son devoir de chef d'État et fasse respecter le droit à la vie de tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes, y compris ceux et celles vivant dans le ventre de leur mère. Il y va de son honneur, non seulement en tant que dirigeant et responsable du bien commun, mais en tant que père. Car quoi de plus important pour un père digne de ce nom que de tout faire pour protéger la vie des plus vulnérables? Monsieur le Premier ministre, Justin Trudeau, vous qui êtes père de famille, vous avez encore la possibilité de faire ce qui aurait dû être fait depuis longtemps. Sauvez les enfants à naître du Canada, ne serait-ce que pour sauver votre âme que vous mettez en péril par votre indifférence et votre inaction devant cet odieux massacre des saints innocents. Rappelez-vous les paroles de l'Évangile. Chaque fois que vous l'avez fait à l'un de ces plus petits d'entre mes frères, c'est à moi que vous l'avez fait. Merci. Thank you. We'll now be going to walk to Parliament, to the Prime Minister's office, where Jeff Gunnarson will deliver his letter to the Prime Minister. Nous allons donc maintenant nous rendre au bureau du Premier ministre pour livrer la lettre que Jeff Gunnarson a écrite.
Make life win in Canada. No compromises, no exceptions, no excuses. Go to campaignlifecoalition.com.